Hey guys, Keith here. An update video. I haven't done one in a while. This one's covering 2019 54 all the way up to what I expect will be the last one for the year 2019.72. So there are a few things to go through, although there's been a lot of work on squashing bugs, so the number of enhancements is not huge, so hopefully we'll get through it reasonably quickly. So let's start back in 54, one enhancement, adding support for video files with an alpha channel to the video effect. Now, these don't actually exist very commonly, but here I've got a video that happens to have an alpha channel. Now, it's not a very exciting video, but this black area here is actually not black. It's actually an alpha of 0, which means it's transparent. So if I take that video and place it over the top of a butterfly effect here, and we let it render, you'll see that what happens is the video effect actually shows up over the top of the butterfly effect, and the butterfly effect bleeds through. Now, if you don't have alpha in your video, obviously nothing's different, but if you do happen to have alpha, you can now place those videos over the top of other things and they will respect the alpha and allow the color to come through. Now, something to be aware of, I don't guarantee that that works if you happen to have set the hardware video decoder to on. We'll talk a little bit more about hardware video decoding shortly, but basically I'm not sure that when we have the hardware video decoder that it actually handles correctly video files that contain an alpha channel. So yeah, if you're going to go that way, you may need to turn hardware video decoding off. All right, the next one up is this value curve drag and drop mode. Now, these windows here you can access via the view windows, and you can bring up the value curves and the color dropper. Now, there's a couple of quirks here. I'm not sure why, but not all of these are working. But in order to set a value curve, you used to have to click on the button and open up these buttons and select the value curves here. But now, and it doesn't work with all of them for some reason, this one here is not working, but this one here does. If you come down, you can drag and drop it onto the value curve button, and it will apply the value curve immediately and save you having to go into the dialog. So it allows you to build up a library of these and just drag and drop them for much quicker application of value curves. And I'll have to look at why that particular one's not applying correctly. Similarly with the colors up here, you can now have this colors panel here where all of the colors used in your sequence or saved away are now presented in a single panel. And if you want to change the colors over here, instead of having to left click or right click on the color panel and go and choose them, I can just come in here and drag and drop the colors across, and it will immediately change the colors here, which enables you to change colors a lot more quickly. So, and obviously you can add to these here. You would add to them by coming into the value curve panel, creating your new value curve here, and clicking export and saving the file, and then it would start to appear on this panel. And the same with the colors. You can export the colors here if you want to export color curves, and if you want to add colors, just static colors here, anything that you save here to this drop down, etc., will automatically be added into that list as well. So yeah, a couple of things that you can do to improve the speed of sequencing by dragging and dropping those things around. Optimize FPP config, upload to not upload file that's the same to avoid the restart flag being set. So there's a bunch of changes that Dan's made to the FPP upload. I don't have an FPP set up, so I'm not going to go through them all. But all this one is trying to do is minimize the number of times you have to restart FFPD on your FPP when you do the upload, by avoiding uploading the file if it doesn't need to. A couple of changes here to xSchedule, adding a extensive SMS blacklist. If you're running xSchedule, sorry, you can see I haven't run it here before. If you If you run the SMS plugin, you do have the option in here to use a local blacklist. There's now a blacklist file that's provided. So if you go into your program files, xLights folder, you'll see there is actually a blacklist file here which contains a whole bunch of curse words which you might want to automatically ban from SMS messages. You can go and read those at your leisure. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of those included, so you don't have to go and develop your own. Add the ability to manually moderate messages. So in these options here, you do now have manual message moderation, which you can turn on. Okay. Oh, let's put it into test mode. Okay. All right. What this allows you to do is, if we insert a couple of test messages in here, it adds a moderate button here where you can either manually accept or not accept messages to allow them through. So if you want to be doubly sure and manually check every message before it appears on your display, you can absolutely do that. And obviously that would only be of limited use if you didn't then also have the ability using the web interface here. There is a plugin for the SMS feature, and there is this ability here to allow a message through. So these messages are now all being allowed through, or you can go back and unallow them through if you want to. So you now have that manual moderation of messages for those people who want to be extra careful about the sorts of messages get displayed on their display. So that's those two. The color dropper panel we've already talked about. Model group clone. So if you're in your display and you've got a model group that has all the arches and you want to create another model group which is very similar, you may want to come up here and right click and clone the group, and now you can go in and rename it if you want, and you can go and change things around. So it's a quick way to create a second group which is very much like a prior group, and maybe you want to add a model or remove a model or something. Make it a little bit quicker. Added folder filter selection to the FPP Connect dialog. Again, I don't have any here, but there's some filters here around which folders to go to, etc. And there's probably a right-click menu here, but again, I don't have any FSCQ files or anything on this machine. It's a brand new machine. But yeah, so some things there to make it easier to find your sequences or limit which folders it searches for sequences. Okay, all right, the next one here is Scott's added a Shift U and Shift D key bindings to add fade in and fade out for 1 second to selected effects. So here we just need a bunch of effects that we want to demonstrate this on. Now, I did have to delete my key bindings in order for this to work. So if you've got an old key bindings file that was created prior to this change, this won't work. So you'd have to delete your key bindings and recreate it. But having selected the effects, if I hit Shift U, oops, that didn't work. If I hit no, well, that's interesting. Okay, so Shift U works when I selected one effect, but not when I selected two. Okay, but if I've got one effect selected, I hit Shift D, it adds the fade in and then adds the fade out. Now that's meant to work with multiple, so I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, maybe it's maybe the problem is you've got to have a selected effect. Okay, Anyway, but that's what the Shift U and Shift D does in that one there. Okay, so the next one relates to hardware video decoding. This particular change was just on the OS X, but it's since also been added to Windows. It led to a lot of instability, and it's not perfect, but basically there is this option here to use a hardware video decoder. What this will do is when it's trying to decode a video file, instead of doing it using your computer's CPU, it'll use your graphics card to do the video decoding, and depending on the particular scenario, it will also use the video coder to do things like resize the video, etc. Now this can speed up video rendering, but there are side effects of it that aren't entirely desirable. One obviously is that those alpha videos, which I don't think work very well with it. I also find that it produces a much harsher looking video. So you may not be entirely happy with some of the render quality that you get out of the hardware video decoder. I think this is one of these things which is, you know, at best you'd call it in alpha state. It doesn't work with all video cards. So it's far from a perfect implementation, but it's one of those things that we'd like to get going because it will significantly speed up video rendering. This also has an equivalent option inside xSchedule. That one there, the option is hidden away inside the settings. Hardware accelerated video. I know that if I've got multiple small videos that I'm displaying on the screen, this has made a huge amount of difference, but I do find that video interlacing is more apparent in the hardware accelerated video decoding, and so I'm not entirely happy with it. And in fact, when I ran my show this year, I turned it off because I was sufficiently unhappy with its output quality to not use it. But anyway, something for you to consider, and it may get better in the future as we continue to work through that. All right, okay. So that brings us up to here. This one here, we did remove the Synchronite support. Basically, the provider of those boards decided that it was better if xLights was not supported. Basically, he's taking his users to the cleaners with his high-priced software and his incredibly high-priced hardware. His choice, you know, quite frankly, I just feel sorry for his customers. They're a real shame. xSchedule API for querying pixels, which have been set via the API. For those people that are playing with the API, inside the xLights API documentation, which the vast majority of people will find on GitHub. GitHub. If I go into the code in the xSchedule folder, there is the API documentation, and in the API documentation there is an API here . So there is an API to set the pixels, which is this one just up here. So you can set a set of pixels to a particular color or a range of pixels. And then I think it's one of the query APIs. Yeah, this one here. Get the ranges set, so a list of channel ranges that have been set by the set pixel range. So if you're building something that's wants to set certain elements to certain colors, and you want to query back what's then actually in effect, that API's been added. Special options, you don't really need to worry so much about this, but there is now a special options file which by default sits inside your program files xLights folder, but it won't actually be access from there. But you can take this special options file and place it into your show folder. What this allows you to do is it gives you some very specific and detailed options that you can set for xLights. And this is where basically we hide away options that we really don't think many users are going to want to touch. Just for those few situations where we need to change it without having to go back and change the code. FPP, BB, DMX string, BB black DMX string, set minimum length to 16 channels. Several controllers have issues with less than that. Okay, I'll take Dan's word for it. Gil, add a redo option to the sequencer grid. This is kind of nice. So if I come in here and I delete this and I press Control Z to undo it, there is now a control, tools, sorry, edit. Okay, where did you hide it? Undo. Okay, so there's now a redo here. But there's no key for it. Oh, yes, there is a Control Y. So you can undo things and then you can press Control Y to redo things. It only works in the sequencer grid. It doesn't work elsewhere like the layout tab, etc. This is one of these things that has to be manually added, and Gil took the time to add it back into the sequencer grid here. So if you go too far with your Control Zs and you want to redo things, you can now press Control Y. Okay, okay, so an option to xSchedule. So this is kind of neat, this one here. There's now an option in xSchedule here to say late starting scheduled sequences uses time to determine the start location. If you check this checkbox, and let's imagine your sequence is meant to start at 7 p.m, but for some reason it doesn't start until 7:30 p.m, or maybe xSchedule crashes and so you restart it at 7:30. Now normally what would happen is it would realize that, hey, that schedule's meant to be running, and so it would start it off and it would start from the beginning, which is kind of frustrating because, you know, people have already seen the first half hour, and to jump back to redo it all again means that you sit there pressing next to try and get it up to where it was up to. When you set this option here, when the schedule is started at 7:30, it will actually look at the schedule and what should have been playing, and it will work out which song it believes it would have been up to and exactly how far into that song it would have been. And so when it restarts, it actually almost picks up from exactly where it left off, albeit a few seconds out because of the restart time. So combined with things like, you know, a daemon to monitor xSchedule and restart it if it happens to shut down, etc. Basically, your schedule might have an outage of a few seconds and come back and keep playing as if it never even got interrupted. So a useful option. And something I definitely will be introducing into my show going forward. So that's that one. Option to double click to move model. Okay, so this is basically if you're in the layout here and you click on one of these model groups, you can remove the snowflake here just by double clicking on it, or you can add this reindeer in just by double clicking on it, and it would have added it to the bottom of the list. So rather than having to drag and drop them or click the buttons, you can also just double click on items to move them backwards and forwards between the two lists. Add an arch gap model property. So these arches here, they're not actually that close together. They're actually separated. So there's now a gap between arches. So now you can increase this number. Okay, looks like you need to let's make it a bit bigger. Oh, 100. Okay. All right, that's interesting. looks like there's a bug in it. It's only adding the gap between the third and the fourth arch. Gonna have to look at that one. But basically, yeah, the idea of the gap between arches is it creates this gap. Let's add a new one here. We'll add 2 and we'll increase the gap between the arches. And you can see as we increase the number, the gap between the arches gets larger. Okay, that one worked okay. I'm not sure why that one didn't work. Okay, added copy and rename to the model faces dialog. So if we're in here and we go to the faces dialog here, okay, so there's now a copy and a rename up here if you want to create a second face or rename a face definition, and you just click those 3 dots there to get that. You can also access the import from model or import from file there. So that's that one. Added horizontal stack scaled and vertical stack scale to the render styles. This relates to sequencing on a group. What he means here, we'll just, he's added these horizontal stack and vertical stack scaled. Normally when you horizontally stack, it just lines them all the buffers up next to one another. What scaled is going to do is make each buffer the same height. When it's horizontally stacked and when it's vertically stacked, it will make them all the same width when it's creating those buffers. Okay, brings us to November. Add degree setting to the sphere model. So for that, we're going to have to go into 3D mode. Let's drop a sphere down. So here we have a sphere. Okay. Now there is a degrees model here, so I can make this a 180 degree sphere, and you'll see that the sphere is now not fully round. It's actually, what's the best way to show this? I don't have my... should have my mouse with me. Okay, there you can see it there. You can see how it doesn't go all the way around. When it was 360 degrees, it's a full sphere, and with 180 it's now a half sphere. So that's what that one is. zlib to FSCQ file support. Basically now when you go down to the FSCQ version, you'll see that there are additional types of V2. The V2Z standard is the standard file. That was the original V2 compressed. There's now a V2 uncompressed and a V2 zlib. Now these have been created because some of these are easier to implement on some really low-end boards, and so Dan's offered some flexibility around the compression on the V2 files. Adding xLight and xLights controller to the controller selection drop-down. By that, that just means Scott's added some additional settings into here. So this has become quite a list of controller types. Scott's been very busy with some of the holiday horror boards and bringing support of those into xLights. Add the upload of virtual matrices to FPP. I believe that's in FPP Connect. I'm not sure exactly where, or maybe it's automatic. I'm less sure about that one. Again, adding J1sys xLights to the multi-controller upload dialog. what he means by that is in upload to controller you can do upload all controllers, and now there's additional controller types in here. This is a way to, if you've got multiple controllers typically of the same type, you can use this dialog to actually upload to all of your controllers in one easy action rather than having to run around and upload the inputs and outputs, etc. separately. This will do both, and it will do all your controllers in one fell swoop. Useful if you've got a bunch of very similar controllers. Snowstorm support for color curves. So this had been missing. Where are we? Strobe. Snowstorm. You can now have a color curve here. Putting it on there is not going to make a lot of difference. And now the snowstorm effect will actually respect the color curve and change the color of the snowstorm over time. That previously wasn't there. Certain pixel styles. Okay, so there are a couple of pixel styles in here. So if you're down here in your appearance properties and you're changing your pixel style, I think it's a solid and blended circle pixel styles. If you've got a model with a large number of nodes, these things are extremely expensive to render. And so that can lead to some real lagginess in display. And so we now in check sequence will display a warning if you're using one of these pixel styles on a model that has a large number of nodes, because it's not going to deliver a great experience. Support face model on a group. Okay, so what this means is so let's get out of 3D mode. If I've got a bunch of faces here, now let's add a group. And if I come down and add my faces in, and then I go and find it, there they are there. Now, if I drop a faces effect on a group, that normally wouldn't work. But because all of these faces have got the same face definition, if I change this to, per model default, you'll see that it actually does display the face effect on all three models. And that only works because all three face effects that sit within the group have got the same face definition. And so if you want them to all sing the same thing, you can now sequence them at the group level, as long as you're using this per model default render buffer style. We talked about V2, the V2 file format, bulk edit of smart remotes. All that means is that now when you're in here and you're bulk editing, you can now come in. Now you have to have the controller connection set on these models. And if I come in a bulk edit, I can now set the smart remote, and I can bulk edit those rather than having to go and select each model independently and change it. AlphaPix 4 controller upload support. So what that means here is if this was a, if I made this a AlphaPix 4, right, I can now do the upload to controller, and the AlphaPix is now supported as something, as is a number of others. Alt-click panning to the Layout tab for 2D only. So what that means is if I hold down the Alt key and I click, I can now pan this around, whereas previously there was no easy way to pan. I could zoom without the mouse wheel, but I couldn't pan because I had no mouse wheel to click on. But now if I hold down the Alt key, I can move that around. It only works in 2D mode. One of those things that we have to do some more work on. APA 102 protocol support. All that means is if you're down here in the controller connection, you can now specify the APA 102 pixel type, and if your controller supports it in the upload, it'll upload that. Test mode to the xSchedule web interface. What this means is if you go into the web interface, there is now a test plugin here, and the test plugin lets you choose, in this case I've only got one model, but you can set it to a particular, you can turn it on or you can turn it off, or you can set it to the particular color that you type in up here, or select. I think, and then you can set it to that color or just turn it on or reset it. So yeah, a bit of a test mode. If you had multiple models, they would all appear here so you can access them. Okay, sort by name but by size. So this is here, if you're in here and edit display elements, Scott's added a new sort here where you can now sort by name but groups at top by size, and what that does is it guarantees that the groups that have the most elements in them appear higher up in the list. This is kind of useful because, you know, in theory you want to have the groups which have most things in it near the top of the list, so that when you drop something onto a group below it, that it would overwrite the one that had more in it. So it's kind of more likely to be the order that you would want to have them in. So a useful new sort order. Add button to move selected models to the top of the model list. Again, in edit display elements here, so Scott's added this move to the top of the list, so it just allows you to, you can select a few things down here and just move them all the way up to the top of the list. Just a quick shortcut. Okay, takes us to the end of November and into December. Okay, so a couple of things here that are a little bit harder to show. This one here on Windows, this only works on Windows, but what xSchedule will do is when it starts up, it will actually turn off sleep mode and screen blanking on your computer. We do this because both of those things either could interfere with your display by shutting your computer down prematurely, or slow down xSchedule. And so when xSchedule's running, basically it forces your computer to stay on and to avoid any of those low power sleep modes, etc., that might interfere with your display. When we're outputting to lights, xSchedule will now also bump the process priority so that it is slightly higher than any other processes or normal processes that are running. Now, it doesn't make it mission critical or anything, so it's not going to interfere with the performance of your overall PC, but it guarantees that xSchedule gets just that little bit more priority to ensure that the packets that it's sending out, etc., are all going to get out there as quickly as possible. Now, this only happens while it's outputting to light, so when xSchedule's running and waiting for the show to start, etc., it'll still be running at normal priority. It just kicks up a gear at that time when it needs to start to run. Play one random step in a specified playlist API. So this is just another API command, which means it's also a command that you can schedule or trigger off an event to just choose a random step out of a playlist and play it, and then it will stop playing that playlist. So that can be useful if you just want to choose a random song. Add universe ID start channel to the model export, even if the model was not defined that way. I found this quite useful. If I come up to Tools and Export Models, this is actually going to be a little bit hard to show, to be honest, because I don't actually have Excel or anything on this machine. So on my desktop there should be a file now called aaa.csv. We're just going to open it with Notepad++. Okay, very hard to read, but essentially what it's going to do is it's always going to show something like the universe and start channel for every model, even if that model was defined in this case as a model that's chained behind another model, but it will still give you the universe and start channel. And that can be useful when it comes time to configure your controller. Maybe you want to manually enter or validate that your controller has actually been updated with the right universe and start channel, and so now you can look inside this CSV file, which you would normally open in Excel, and see exactly which universe and start channel that model should have been on. Sorry, it wasn't well set up to demonstrate that one. Adjust the FSCQ compression depending on the Pi model. Again, this has to do with FPP upload. I think Dan probably needs to do an updated video given the number of little tweaks that have gone on over the last few months. The controller upload support, SCHEDule added support for the AlphaPix 16 and the Flex controller. Not a great deal to show there. Obviously, they're just additional controllers in the list now, and you can do uploading to it. Increase the support import time offset range. What this means here is that if you're doing an import of effects, I don't have any superstar files, so that's going to be a bit of a problem on this machine. But when you import the superstar file, you can choose the time offset to use, and Dan just made the available time range bigger. The star node count, Scott just made the nodes per string count here now can be a much higher number. I can't remember what it tops out at. 90. Seems very low. No, it's not 90. Alright, he increased this maximum number here. I'm not sure what it is, but it's pretty high. Anyway, that's what that is. Allow the state effect to work on groups of model containing the same states. Again, this is similar to the faces effect that we just showed. So if I go and grab a model from the download that contains states, so we'll quickly download, we'll grab the Nutcracker because I know the Nutcracker's got a bunch of states defined on it, and we'll insert him, we'll copy him a few times, we'll create a group. Now what we'll do is we'll sequence him, we'll go down to the Nutcracker group, there he is there, we'll throw the state effect on him. Now at the group level, of course, that doesn't seem to do a great deal. We'll turn the all on. Again, not much is happening, but if I choose per model default, it will light them up. There's actually two of them under there and one over here. And so it's lit them all up, even though there's three of them in this group. You can now sequence them at that level there. And if I change the state here to be his boots, it'll just show his boots and so forth. So yeah, that's what that one does. Adding support for negative polyline drops. So some time ago, Gil added the ability with a polyline to actually create a polyline that looks like icicles. So what you can do is you can come to this drop pattern and make it 7 drop icicles, and now they're icicles with 7 drops. Well, now you can also, if you want, make that -7, in which case those icicles become sticks. And with the use of things like alternate drop nodes, etc., you can create you know, maybe these can be your P-sticks, etc., laid out around the edge of your path, etc. Just another way to achieve it. Show the next schedule which will play in blue text in the UI. What that means here is that where you've got a playlist or potentially multiple playlists, whichever one has the earliest start time will now be shown in blue rather than black, so that you can see which one's going to start next. And more controller upload support, the HinksPix Pro and xLights 16 controller upload. Scott added it there. It was removed a little while ago because basically the upload was broken, and Joe, who implemented the original upload, decided that he didn't want to maintain it, so it had to be removed. But Scott's come back around and re-added it back in. I think he went out and bought a board so that he could do that. Add any import type. So what this one means is if you're in the sequencer and doing an import, you've always been able to come down here and say, oh look, I want to see the S5 files, etc. But sometimes you really don't care. You just want to see them all. There's not that many in there. So now you can just select all here, and all of the file types which are supported by the import would appear here in the list, and you can just select them, and it just means you don't have to keep remembering to come down and choose which file types you want to import from. Okay, now again, nothing to show here, but with 2019.72, this is the last release that I plan to release a 32-bit version of xLights. The last 32-bit only hardware was released in 2004, was the last CPU that Intel released that only supported 32-bit. So since then, every computer that's ever been sold is a 64-bit computer. Well, that's not exactly true. Obviously, that thing lasted for a few years. But face facts is, if you've bought a computer in the last 10 years, odds are it's a 64-bit CPU. Now, you may have installed a 32-bit operating system on it. Can't help that. But yeah, going forward, we're not going to support the 32-bit version of xLights anymore, so you'll be stuck on 2019.72. Now, I do recognise that some people do choose to run the scheduler on very old machines because it really doesn't require a great deal of grunt. For that reason, I may choose from time to time to release a 32-bit version just of the scheduler for those people. But there'll be no more 32-bit xLights. Now, we won't deliberately remove the support if you want to go and build a 32-bit version yourself, but we're not going to actively support it, which means I'm not maintaining the build scripts, etc. for 32-bit going forward. Adding zoom to the wiring view, this has been long overdue. We used to provide some awkward workarounds, but in the wiring view here, if you want to zoom in, you can now just put your mouse over where you want to zoom, and you can zoom in, so you can differentiate between the nodes and see exactly where things are. So you can zoom in and zoom out, or you can choose to zoom in over here or zoom in here. If you double click, it resets it, so quick way. And there's also a right click reset, which will reset it back to its default. So you can now zoom in and out on your wiring view. If you've got a mouse wheel, obviously the mouse wheel will also work, unless you do something like that. But that's okay, you can always reset. Very distracting. The other thing is you can now do that here as well. So Gil implemented it here, and so wherever you put your mouse is now where the zoom now works. That was not previously true. It used to zoom into the middle and then you'd have to pan things around. So it makes it a lot easier to get around in 2D. I believe Gil also added that here in 3D as well. So now it's a little bit quirky. There is a bit of an arc in it still. Gil and I spent a lot of time trying to work out how to get zoom to the mouse to work. And for 2D, we managed to get rid of this arcing. Gil hasn't quite got rid of it all here in 3D, but it's a damn sight better than it was. The ability to point at what you want to zoom into is a lot better than what it used to be. And finally, DMX models should now work for all effects. Now, what this means is when you drop down, when you put in a DMX model, and by DMX model I mean one of these. It doesn't have to be a moving head. There's a bunch of different types of moving 3D models in here. So you can do a skull, etc. If you dropped an effects on it, really very few of them actually worked correctly. Basically, I think the on effect and the color wash effect were the only ones that were smart enough to recognize which channels, and the skull's probably not a great one, but if you were doing the moving head, you'd go and set the red channel and the green channel and the blue channel, and then when you drop the color on the model when you were sequencing it, knowing which channel to apply those colors to meant that the effect had to understand what sort of model it was and go and fish out exactly which channel to update. So Guild's gone and moved that logic such that almost any effect now when dropped onto a DMX model will correctly update the right channels within that model to put the color on it, which means you can now include DMX models in groups, etc., I think, and do that sort of sequencing. And that's it. So that's 2019.54 to 72. Not a huge number of enhancements, a lot of stuff stabilizing, and just solving a few issues that people were having as they moved into the playing season of their shows. 2020 looks like it's going to be an exciting year. There's a whole bunch of new stuff that we want to add, and I hope you got something out of that. Thanks, guys.